Welcome, Carmen Blair, the Deputy Director of the San Mateo County Historical Association. We are so excited to have you to talk about the great estate of the Peninsula. And I will have you introduce yourself and please carry on the presentation. We're very, very excited.
Thank you so much for having me today. The Great Estates was one of my favorite topics to talk about, so I'm very pleased to be sharing some of what I've learned about the local Great Estates, mainly as I was doing research for some of our exhibits here. I've been with the San Mateo County Historical Association since 1998, so I've had the joy to work on many of our permanent exhibits. Now, there's no way that I can speak about every great estate. So I would like to share today information about some of the families and estates that help highlight specific themes, as well as sharing some of my favorite stories. So this is the Peninsula in 1850. William Dougal did this drawing at that time as he was traveling between San Francisco and San Jose. And if you look at this image, you realize how rural, how little it was developed in 1850. This is El Camino Real. Today, this road would be full of businesses, but back then there were only about 500 people living in what today is San Mateo County. Now, stagecoach service had started in 1849 between San Francisco, which was the fastest growing city in the world, and San Jose, that they thought would be the first state capital. So you could get up and down the county, but it took 6 hours to 9 hours to make that journey. And that's what they advertised. It was dirt roads, and in rainy season, it would take much longer. And the cost for that journey, 2 ounces of gold are the same as $32. So this was not a journey that you would undertake often or without a good reason. So there weren't really great estates here in that very early American time period. But some people were starting to look down the peninsula. W.D.M. Howard had come to California in 1838. He was involved in the hide and tallow trade, and he and his partner, shortly before the gold rush, bought out the Hudson Bay Company, which put them in prime position to be the merchants to the gold fields. And in June 1849, as was his habit, WDM went down to the docks in San Francisco to greet ships coming in. And that day he met a ship from Valparaiso, Chile. On board was 16-year-old Agnes Poet. They were married within a month and had their first son within a year. Now, W.D.M. Howard did own land down in what is now San Mateo County. He had bought 6,500 acres of Rancho San Mateo. And despite the length of the journey to San Francisco, there were some reasons to have a country home in addition to a San Francisco home, especially with a young wife. There was violence in San Francisco. The Vigilance Committee formed in 1851 and revived in 1856. According to local legend, this home, the W.D.M. Howard home, El Cerrito, was the first great estate of the peninsula. Legend has it that it came prefabricated around Cape Horn. Now, W.D.M. Howard did die young in 1856, so it is possible that there was only a small cottage during his lifetime, and that the larger home came during Agnes's second marriage. Things changed in the 1860s when the large business owners in San Francisco started looking at the concept of having a railroad to San Jose. Now, this was the early 1860s that they were looking at doing this. And they had trouble building because it was the time period of the Civil War. So they had a shortage of steel and they had a shortage of labor. But they finally managed to complete the San Francisco and San Jose Railroad and start service along the whole route in 1864. When we look at this timetable from a few years later in 1870, you can see that the commute begins. But the earliest you can arrive in San Francisco is 9 in the morning. And the latest you can leave is 4:40 in the afternoon. So this is not a commute for workers who needed to work, say, a 12-hour workday. This was for the owners of the business who could afford to get into the office a little late, take a long lunch, and then leave early. This is the Menlo Park train station. New West magazine in 1867 wrote, "You leave San Francisco by the San Jose Railroad, one of the few railroads yet built in the state. The passengers look like any respectable travelers on the East Coast, perhaps on a whole a tint ruddier and more robust, and fully as nicely dressed. The ladies often in quiet traveling dress, and the gentlemen in good business suits and gloved." Now, Menlo Park train station, it was $2.30 round trip from Menlo Park to San Francisco and back to Menlo Park again. That was more than the daily wage of many American workers. So who were our commuters? They were people like Thomas Selby. Thomas Selby was the mayor of San Francisco from 1869 to 1871. And he and his wife, Henrietta, owned this home in Menlo Park. Now, this was not their full-time home. This was their weekend retreat or their summer home that they liked to use for entertainment. Mrs. Selby was known for her 17-course dinners. People were seated by 6 p.m. and they finished their dinner at midnight. She considered anything shorter a failure. So entertaining was one of the prime purposes to have a home down on the peninsula, or a second home down on the peninsula. Another one of our commuters was John Parrott. He was involved in everything from commerce to banking. He had holdings from Hawaii to Nome. He owned clipper ships and quicksilver mines. This was the summer place that he built in San Mateo for his wife, 6 daughters, and 1 son, built around 1868. Now, one of my favorite great estate stories is involving his wife, Abigail. When John died in 1884, he instructed his wife to remember him by being charitable to the poor. Now, this could be interpreted in a lot of different ways, but she decided that she wanted to feed the homeless that were walking up and down El Camino Real, so right near their home. And so she started feeding them, and she fed them the same food that she fed to guests in her own home. And it is estimated that she served 300,000 meals before her death. Antoine Burrell was an immigrant from Switzerland. He was involved with the family shipping and banking firm. He was also involved in the Bank of California and the Spring Valley Water Company. And in his spare time, he was the Swiss Consul General. He and his wife, Grace, decided that they wanted a home here on the peninsula for their 7 children. They bought 300 acres right near El Camino Real. These estates took up a lot of the prime territory and property along El Camino, which was also pretty near the train route. So he bought 300 acres in 1874, mainly because one of his daughters was not in the best of health, and they thought living on the peninsula would be healthier for her. So we have a whole series of images in the archives showing them enjoying the great outdoors, whether that's playing tennis or hunting on the grounds themselves. This is Alvinza Hayward, who is one of the sternest looking people I think we have a picture of in the archives. He was a 49er. He and his wife Charity came out to the gold fields with nothing. It is said that Charity took in wash from the other miners to keep them going, but he did strike it rich. And this is the mansion that he built in San Mateo. His grounds here included a racetrack, said to be one of the finest private tracks in the state. Hayward was also known for his creation of San Mateo's first permanent water supply. Old timers would tell stories of him riding to the San Mateo train station in a Prince Albert coat, silk tall hat, in a black carriage pulled by black horses. This is another one of our great estate owners. This is Darius Ogden Mills. He was president of the Bank of California, had quite a few investments going, and this was his second home in Millbrae. Um, in fact, the estate at one point was named Millbrae. It had a President Grant suite because President Grant did come and visit. Mills had a hobby of collecting fine paintings for his estate, and there was a large canvas of Charles XII that covered almost an entire wall. Now, his wife, Jane, liked to collect exotic flowers from around the world. And so you can see on the side of the picture, the conservatory that he built for her for those exotic flowers. Now, there were a lot of relationships between the different estates, and it's easy to think of these estates in California, here in San Mateo County, as being separate as what was going on in the rest of the world, which is why I like this picture. Starting on this side, that's Elizabeth Mills Reed, Mills's daughter. She was known for her work starting Mills Hospital. Her husband, Whitlaw Reed, is in the back. He was the editor of the New York Tribune. So they were quite an influential New York society couple. He also became ambassador to the court of St. James, which allowed some of the local girls from here to be presented in the English court. Then we have Darius Ogden Mills. Next to him is Eli Root, who was the Secretary of War under two presidents, as well as the Secretary of State under another. This gentleman with the hat is J.P. Morgan, the financier of the time period, known for making loans to the US government. And finally, on the side here, we have Ogden Mills. So it just kind of goes to show that these great estate families did have relationships across the nation and influence across the nation as well. This is Adeline Mills, Darius Ogden Mills' sister. She married Ansel Easton in 1857. Now, this shows her more in the 1880s, but in 1857, she and her husband decided that they would have a honeymoon in Europe. So first they had to take a steamer around the tip of South America. When they were off the coast of the Carolinas, a hurricane came up and the ship started taking on water and sank. 400 lives were lost in the sinking of the SS Central America, as well as 21 tons of California gold. This was later found in 1989, and among the things found on board was her honeymoon trunk. Now, miraculously, both Adeline and her husband Ansel survived the shipwreck. They settled in Burlingame at Black Hawk Ranch. They lived there with their children. Now, Ansel died young from a fall from a horse, so Adeline was raising her children by herself. Her daughter, Jenny Easton, married Charles Frederick Crocker, son of Charles Crocker, the Transcontinental Railroad builder. They had three children, C. Templeton, Mary, and Jenny. And this is Jenny Crocker shown. And now, since Both Jenny Easton Crocker and Charles Frederick Crocker died young. It was Adeline Easton who was raising her Crocker grandchildren. The Crocker home was this one, Uplands. Its style is sometimes called stylized Old Gothic. The architect is Bruce Price. You might not recognize his name, but you might recognize the name of his daughter, Emily Post. Now, uplands that I first showed you is sometimes referred to as old uplands because Jenny Easton Crocker and Charles Frederick Crocker's son, C. Templeton Crocker, built new uplands, presumably named after his childhood home. Now, I want to circle back to the Howard family, that first great estate family. W.D.M. Howard died in 1856, and Old Uplands was actually built by his son, Willie Howard. So it was originally a Howard home. This particular picture of the Howard family is on Agnes Poet Howard ended up marrying her brother-in-law after her first husband died. And so this is the day that George Howard Jr. was born. Now, this is actually George Howard Jr. as an adult shown with his son. George Howard spent time in Europe. Family sources indicate that he studied in Geneva and then studied architecture in Paris. He's not as well known as A. Page Brown or Arthur Brown Jr. or Willis Polk. But in total, George designed approximately 75 homes on the peninsula. His family had connections all through the peninsula, and so he was able to build many mansions or design many mansions for friends and family. Among the homes that he designed was this one, Howard Hall. This was his own home. According to legend, in the 1920s, in a true Great Gatsby moment, guests at a party drove Astute's Bearcat right up these central steps. Whether it's true or not, that is the local legend. Another of the great estates, this one in Menlo Park, is Thurlow Lodge. This was home to Senator Milton and Molly Latham, purchased around 1872. Milton Latham had been governor for a few days, and then he appointed himself senator to take the place of US Senator David Broderick, who was killed in a duel. He lost the next election, but he was referred to as Senator Latham after that. When the Lathams purchased the property, they did renovations in the mansion. In a hurry to entertain, they ordered workmen to hurry up. So the workmen set up oil stoves to dry the paint and wallpaper, and the whole thing burned to the ground. So what you see here is the mansion that they built to replace it. It was elaborate in every detail. This is the stable that featured varnished redwood and cedar. They had 32 carriages and a matching pair of horses for each carriage. Molly Latham spent $200,000 on fine furniture and art from the Orient. Gertrude Atherton, who married into the Atherton family after whom the town is named, wrote in her book Adventures of the Novelist about one of the parties held here at Thurlow Lodge. And all of the locals were very excited because an English duke was showing up at this party. And this duke, the Duke of Manchester, showed up in Western attire because all he knew of California was what was in cowboy novels and thought that that's how everyone should dress, whereas all the guests were dressed up in their Parisian finery. James Flood was an Irish saloon keeper. When he came to California, he did listen in to conversations. He struck it rich in the single most valuable silver discovery in Nevada. He was earning $200,000 a month and an age before income tax. The San Francisco newspaper's list of eligible maidens noted that his daughter was Jenny. She was described as Miss Jenny Flood, eyes blue, hair light brown, figure well developed, fortune immense. Now, they, of course, also had a mansion up in San Francisco, but this was the home that they built down here in the Menlo Park area. Construction was in excess of $1 million. By one inflation calculator that I use, that was over 27 million in today's money. And at least according to Gertrude Atherton in her writings, some of the neighbors thought that this home was just a little much. Gertrude wrote, "It looked more like a house on a wedding cake than something to live in." So staff here at the museum tends to refer to this as the wedding cake house. Now, this house was on 600 acres, and Flood employed 120 gardeners, 6 of them just to maintain the 22 acres of lawn surrounding the house. So there was a lot of property and a lot of people were employed working on these estates. Now, the home itself did feature a lot of silver fixtures, and that silver was, of course, from his mines in Nevada. I can't talk about the great estates without mentioning this woman, Harriet Pullman Carolyn. She was the son of George Pullman of the Pullman sleeping car fortune, and she married Francis Carolyn in 1892. Now, according to local legend, her father gave the money as a wedding present to underwrite the cost of a home to make sure his daughter was kept in the style to which she was accustomed. Crossways down in the Burlingame area included a house, a greenhouse, tennis courts, and kennels. Now, they also purchased a stock farm in the area for raising horses in 1901 and named it Crossways Farm. That house didn't quite fit Harriet's idea of what her home on the peninsula should look like. She was very much liked the idea of a French chateau, and she went to Paris. She interviewed people in Paris to help her create her dream home. She hired renowned Beaux-Arts architect Ernest Sanson to make the preliminary plans for her chateau. And Willis Polk was made the on-site construction manager and awarded contracts for the construction. Now, construction of this 100-room home was slow due to World War I. Harriet had hoped to be able to entertain during the Panama Pacific Exposition of 1915, but they weren't able to occupy it until 1916. Now, the home among its furnishings included 3 antique salons that Harriet had purchased in France for the sum of $50,000, or roughly $1.2 million. Now, they occupied it in 1916, but the Carolyns closed the home indefinitely in 1918, and the couple later ended up divorcing. Filoli was built by William Bourne II and his wife Agnes. William Bourne II owned the Empire Gold Mine. He was president of the Spring Valley Water Company. Now, the company controlled major portions of land in San Mateo County, providing fresh water for San Francisco. And Bourne couldn't build on company land, so he purchased nearby land, about 715 acres. Today, there are 600, or at one point, there were 654 acres of Filoli property. Rail access was no longer as central. This was 1917. You didn't need to be next to the railroad tracks. Automobiles had come in. It was easier to be further afield. To Bourne, the beauty and privacy of the land appeared to have played a major role and where he decided to build his mansion. The design and construction process for Bourne began with his first letter to Willis Polk before World War I. And he wanted a style of an English country house of the late 17th and early 18th centuries. The home itself between 1937 and 1975 was the home of the Roth family. Lorelei Matson Roth was the heiress of the Matson Shipping Company. I've talked a lot about the buildings, but it's important to remember that these were estates. So this is the orchard that was on Valparaiso, the Atherton estate, the dairy that was at the Millbrae estate, and there was a nursery that went in at Thurlow Lodge over a later owner, Timothy Hopkins. So some of these gentlemen actually describe themselves as gentlemen farmers as well as businessmen. Now, observers who visited San Mateo County did remark that the appearance and feel of San Mateo was like Europe, where villages of common people existed near land of nobility and catered to the needs of nobility. So prime land in San Mateo County belonging to these great estates. Historians do argue that this slow growth on the peninsula kept San Mateo at a relatively small population and discouraged other industries from developing, especially along the El Camino Real route. Many of these great estate owners did see themselves, at least in part, as benefactors to the community or wanted to be perceived as benefactors to the community. This is the Laurel School, also known as the Young Ladies Institute. Sponsors to the school included the Howard family, the Phelps family, the Easton family, the Mills family, the Parrott family, and the Selby family. So many of the families whose homes that we have seen. But what really was important to a lot of these great estate owners was the outdoor lifestyle that was possible on the peninsula. Sunset Magazine started in 1898 as a promotional magazine for the Southern Pacific. And they wrote in Sunset Magazine, in no section of this hemisphere is there a place where an Englishman of sporting proclivities would feel so much at home as San Mateo County. And this is a fox and hound hunt that was popular throughout property in the Hillsborough and Burlingame area. I can't even imagine the reaction today if fox and hound would just go through private property there. This is the Burlingame Country Club. In 1893, it became the first country club west of the Mississippi. It was the brainchild of Francis Newlands, who had inherited, he and his wife had inherited property from his father, Senator Sharon. A. Page Brown, who was the architect that designed the State of California Pavilion at the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, first designed 6 cottages in the Tudor Revival architectural style, with the idea that members would be living and staying there. That didn't quite work as he founded, but the activities of the country club were quite popular. Yes, there was golf, but the prime favorite sport was polo. And in fact, Burlingame became known as the winter polo capital, and teams would come from places like South America or England to play polo in Burlingame. The Burlingame Country Club was also a place where these estate owners and their friends could meet each other, could interact with their social peers. It was also a place that they wanted to bring perhaps their business associates down from San Francisco for some entertainment. They decided that the normal Southern Pacific Railroad station really didn't fit their needs in Burlingame. So club members donated $3,000 to build a more impressive train station, which was built on land donated by William Howard, the son of W.D.M. Howard. This station was completed in 1894, 1 year after the founding of the club, and the architect, George Howard, and his partner, Joaquin Matheson. Burlingame's depot was the country's first permanent mission revival style building, and today is home to the Burlingame Historical Society. According to Sunset Magazine, Burlingame Country Club had become a center of European civilization where, quote, princes, barons, and counts are residents and frequent visitors. Now, it's a little hard to see in this picture, so I'll show you a close-up. This is President Roosevelt arriving at the third Burlingame Country Club clubhouse, and the architect, none other than George Howard. I am often asked what happened to some of these great estates. This is the Selby home. In 1900, it became the informal Menlo Golf and Country Club. So the country club idea continued to spread, but not all of the estates were still there. So some of them were able to be used as land for that. This is El Cerrito, the original Howard Mansion. It was moved and in the 1920s served as the Hillsborough Fire Department and City Hall. This is Alvinza Hayward's San Mateo mansion. It was built in 1886. Now, Alvinza Hayward died in 1904, and his wife Charity and their daughter preferred San Francisco. They weren't really that interested in the San Mateo home. So they ended up selling it. The estate was subdivided. At that point, they were talking about how close it was to the streetcar track for a middle-class commute. But the house itself, after remodeling, it became the Peninsula Hotel, which opened in 1908. It was expanded to become a hotel. After remodeling, about 300 people could be accommodated in its 122 rooms. The hotel was under its third management when on June 25th, 1920, the house spectacularly burned to the ground. Linden Towers was completed in 1880. This was the home of James Flood, the Silver King. After Flood's son died, there was a couple of court cases that were held. The family eventually decided to sell this home. The furniture was sold in auction to Hollywood Film Studios, and the property was subdivided. It's the Lindenwood development. And then the house was torn to the ground after 54 years of existence. Thurlow Lodge, Senator Milton Latham's home, was later sold to the Hopkins family. Timothy Hopkins was related to the Big Four Hopkins. In 1906, the home was deemed structurally unsound after the earthquake. The family, when they came down to the Menlo Park area, ended up at a gatehouse and staying there. They had the nursery business. In 1942, it was decided to sell the property. There was an auction. The furnishings got less than $20,000. That's 10% of the purchase price of the furniture back in the 1870s. It is said that some of the furniture from here appeared in the movie The Unsinkable Molly Brown. Now, Dibble Hospital was built during the war on the property of this estate. This is Milbrae of the Mills family. The family was spending more and more time on the East Coast. In 1954, they decided to sell the estate. They did a subdivision of the property. The house itself mysteriously burned to the ground on June 24th, 1954, just a few days before it was due to be demolished. This is the Burrell estate in San Mateo. Now, the extended Burrell family continues to make their home on the peninsula, but this house burned to the ground in 1962, and that was blamed on teenage vandals. Now, there are still some of these old 19th century, early 20th century great estates still in existence. This is New Place. This was William Crocker's home. He was another son of the Transcontinental Railroad builder. This building still exists today as the 5th Burlingame Country Club building. This is New Uplands, the home of C. Templeton Crocker. Now, he never lived at New Uplands for more than a year or two, but today it is the home of the Crystal Springs Uplands School. Filoli is probably the great estate that people are most familiar with today. Mrs. Roth donated it to the National Trust in 1975. And this is a picture that I took when I visited just a few years ago. So we have all sorts of people who visit that site. This is the Carolins. Anne and Charles Johnson of Franklin Templeton restored the mansion between 1998 and 2002. They did live in the home for many years, but they have since moved out of state, and it now belongs to the Carolins Foundation. There is a tour lottery if you want to visit. So you'd have to get on their website to put in an application to visit the Carolins. It is occasionally open for nonprofits for special events as well. This is where I spend most of my time at the San Mateo County History Museum. We are inside the 1910 San Mateo County Courthouse. We're open Tuesdays through Sundays from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. We do have a few exhibits that look at this great estate era. The first one is Journey to Work, looking at how transportation impacted the development of the peninsula and led to the existence of the estates and those first railroad commuters along that El Camino Real route. Living the California Dream takes a look at what suburban life looked like during the different time periods, including this salute to the great estates. And currently we are in process of building the Toby Family Carriage House and Automobile Gallery. And the middle level of that is donated to our carriage collection. We do own over 30 wheeled vehicles. Many of our best carriages are from the Roth collection or from Filoli that she donated to us around the same time that the house was donated to the National Trust. In addition to the families who lived on the estate, who owned these estates, we want to feature within this gallery stories of the workers on the estates and the variety of local businesses that were needed to support the carriage. We need to do more research on this. We would love to find stories of individual people who worked on the estates, whether that's names, pictures, details of how they got to California. If you know anybody whose family had members that worked on these estates, we would love to hear from them. Much of my research was done on site in the archives that has thousands of documents and photographs, as well as the complete run of several newspapers. It is open to researchers free of charge by appointment. Material from the archives was used in the creation of our journal, La Peninsula, which goes out to our members. One of the recent issues was on polo on the peninsula, and it is now available online on our website as well. I think we just have a couple minutes, but does anyone have any questions for me? Well, if you don't want to ask me questions out loud, oh, I'm looking at the chat here. The current Caltrainer railroad lines. So the current, few years ago, they celebrated the 150th anniversary of the rail route between San Francisco and San Jose. The route today is very similar to what you would have seen in 1864. There is a cutoff, the Bayshore cutoff. So the north part has changed just a little bit, but they consider it basically the same rail line. As I say, my email address is here. You are more than welcome to email me with any questions that you might have. Oh, I see there's a question on our admission price. Our admission price is $6 for adults, $4 for seniors and students. We are free the first Friday of every month, and we do have a free general tour at 2 p.m. on those first Fridays. So as I say, please feel free to email me with any questions. Please reference this presentation just so I know. And I do have a very brief resource list if anyone's interested in doing research on their own.
Really interesting. I was born here 82 years ago in Mills Hospital and was married in the county courthouse.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I've had the joy of discovering California history. I'm not from this area, so a lot of my knowledge and research took place working on exhibits and publications.
Well, thank you very much.
You are
Yeah.
certainly welcome.
This is wonderful, Carmen. I learned so much just from this 45 minutes. Thank you.
Okay. I hope we have more.
I know. Hope we have more too. Carmen has a couple more presentations, and it's very interesting, all very interesting. So thank you so much, Carmen.
You are certainly welcome. I hope everyone has a good afternoon.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.